for Tuesday, November 15, 2016, and ask for confirmation of quorum.
Commissioner Moorhead?
Present?
Commissioner Wilson?
Present.
Commissioner Ackland?
Present.
Commissioner Burke absent. Commissioner Castleman?
Present.
Commissioner Wiggins?
Present.
Commissioner Hubach?
Present.
Commissioner Stidham?
Present.
Commissioner Daring? Present.
All right, if we'd please stand for the pledge. All right, I'll ask for disposition of our November 1st minutes. Do I hear a motion to approve? It has been moved and seconded. All in favor? Okay. Moving on to unfinished business, I'll turn to staff regarding Section 3 compensation. Mr. Fairborn, I'm not worried about the silence, but I'll go ahead and chime in here for a second.
Thanks, sir.
I do believe that at the last meeting, there was a push to have staff come up with some kind of structured language. I think Mr. Zur may have that.
Assuming that he has not been, we have a little bit of a conflict tonight between BZA, Planning and Zoning, and here, all of which he has to be in attendance at. And right now, he's on his way back from trial, which went exceedingly long.
For the sake of that reason alone, and because tonight's a little bit of an abbreviated meeting, I'm going to request of this group, can we table the unfinished business since that involves so much of his input? Go ahead and move on to new business, kind of get started, see if we can get some new things talked about, and then we'll just, if we feel we can always set that aside, and, you know, if Mr. Zur would finally show up, then we... Well, Mr. Zur, it's one of those, you were brought up just as we were talking. We're tabling the unfinished business on some of that. That way you guys don't have to deal with that. We'll move on to new discussion. Okay. With that being said, we'll move on. Under new business, it still technically shows old business, but we were actually on to section 3.5 on administrative policy matters. That's where we left off. To be fair, though, is there anything in the previous sections that someone feels that we did not get discussed or closed off for the last meeting? We did have some significant discussion on compensation, some on Mayor Pro Tem. We've had 2 meetings on the qualifications section. If not, we can move on to 3.5. Anybody have any issues or concerns or questions about 3.5? Anybody know what 3.5 is? This is kind of a nuanced section. If I may, while you're reading, Ms. Schubach, would you like to comment?
What this basically says is we can give orders to the staff that only the city manager does. And that we can, if we have concerns, we talk to the city manager and he addresses them, but we don't address them. That doesn't mean we can't talk to them, but we can't give them orders. For instance, Mr. Carteret in their planning and zoning, we might have some questions, but we can't tell him he has to do anything.
Thank you.
I kind of interpreted this as the too many cooks in the kitchen section, where one of the aspects of the council manager type of government, I've had the chance to see it play out in 2 different formats. Stephanie, I think you've also seen multiple city managers as well.
An experience I had with this was, my experience generally is on budget, and so I was always looking at budget, and so I took the budget and went and talked to the gal that always handled the budget way back when. And the city administrator at that time was Dick Herbal, and I was brought to task and told that, did I have an issue with the budget, and if I did, I should have come to Dick about it. And I said, I simply had a few questions about the budget, and I was asking her where those went. And he said I should have gone to him. I said they were just simple questions about them. I just really thought it was simple questions I thought I should be able to ask her about without bothering him.
I've had the opportunity to see kind of a broad spectrum on this. Mr. Herbal's response with Ms. Daring is not uncommon. I found Eric Berlin, his successor, to be almost the point of dictatorial. When I first joined the council, we kind of have a little bit of a briefing where we're kind of brought in and kind of not told how it's going to be, but just kind of shown what the current path is. And I saw him be very verbally striking to staff when there was communication. I think one good example was I caught the head of Public Works out in the hall one day, and sorry, Mr. Fairborn, we are speaking about you when you're not in the room. There you go. The head of Public Works was out in the hall, and I had an issue regarding a storm drain where the concrete, where the drain was kind of sunk, and the opening for the water had grown to such a degree that it was big enough for children to kind of slide down into the sewer. And so a homeowner had brought it to my attention, and this drain was right at a bus stop. So, of course, sitting out, kids horsing around before the bus, what do you think they're going to do? What I had to profess was, back in 1973, I actually had climbed into the storm sewers, and we would literally go all around Silver Lake. I mean, the most horrible, unsafe thing you could ever imagine. And me and my friends were just la, 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 like we could have died in there, nobody found us. And, of course, there were only like 10 homes in Silver Lake. Well, yes, exactly. And so I had asked, I said, I think, don't they make those metal bars that kind of, you bolt down on it and it kind of covers over that? Maybe that would help. And so I said to the head of Public Works, I said, are those expensive? Are those proprietary? Do you have to literally make them, or can you buy them? I've never seen somebody sweat so much just in a simple question like that, and to fumble and stumble and say, Mr. Councilman, I will communicate that to Mr. Berlin, and literally dodged my question, moved away from me as if I had a pox, and to get away from me. And I was very shocked by that. And then I get a phone call later saying, I found it very insulting that you would speak to one of my department heads without my permission, to the degree that a number of us felt like, were we allowed to say good morning or good evening?
What time is it?
Yeah, and it was, and again, we still had good communication in meetings. We still, city affairs got done. And then now to speak about someone as if he's not in the room, but this time he's in the room, is we've actually had staff meetings and work sessions specifically with a different city manager now, where we've literally brought in an outside consultant to talk about the value of some communication. Now, granted, still under the guise of respecting Section 3.5, but again, the idea of being able to ask simple ministerial questions, hey, do we have this type of equipment here, on staff? Just basic stuff has really opened up a lot of communication. I will point out that same department head has, I guess I discovered a personality in him. What a neat person to get to know, but beforehand, we were never even allowed to personally speak to them. And I almost wonder if they had been told not to talk to us, like if they saw us at the grocery store or a restaurant. And now there's a willingness, again, to respect the general principle of this rule, because again, we don't want too many cooks in the kitchen, but it's a lot different system now, than we've had in the past. The question is, and I don't really wish to change this section, but for the sake of quick conversation, I would posit to the group, though, we have a current city manager that would bring that voluntarily to the table for good discussion. Subsequent city managers may not do that and may go back to a more stricter format. And I think that's almost kind of a internal housekeeping process. That's not, I mean, I don't know how much we can dictate in rule. That's kind of the quality of a person aspect. So, but I don't want to change that, but it's important to kind of mention, just because I would also point out that same person that was afraid to even be able to speak to me. This is the same individual who, in his own doing, how many of you have been over to TB Hanna Station? You like it? That was done internally because a staff member felt comfortable enough to present a thought and an idea, and it was developed internally, just the value of the people we have. So we didn't pay outside people to do that. I mean, maybe aspects of it, but you know what I mean, but the general makeup. And so, I mean, there is some value to that communication, and current administration values that, so I just kind of want to throw that out there. But yeah, I've experienced spectrums like that too.
I have also experienced the same thing before in a previous one, because I went to see a new building that had been erected, and I didn't get the individuals, the city manager's permission to go into the building, and he threatened to call the police on me because I wanted to see what was in the new Public Works building. So you do have to kind of watch what you say and what you do on that. It's not a problem now, but it has been in the past, and it may be in the future, so we need to make sure that we still have freedom of speech in the council. I did not give anybody any orders to do anything. I just wanted to see what was like out there. And as I said, they threatened to call the police. I said, if you do, I'll call the newspapers, because you can't, we have to be able to conduct business. And if you can't see what's inside of a building, how can you conduct business regarding that building, whether it needs to be repaired or has some problems that need to be fixed? You have to have some.
Have any, I mean, I know some of you have been on other boards, though. Have any, and I'm not turning this into a gripe session, because, again, predecessors don't have the ability to counter-respond, but have any of you ever run afoul or have any thoughts regarding application of this in your situations? I will also point out, though, while I did express that our current administration is a little more open and fluid, just so you can appreciate, there's still a respect for process and hierarchy. A new staff member was employed. I was in the chambers there waiting for a meeting to start, and this person came up and introduced themselves, and I said, well, hi, and feel free to call me Derek. And the city manager walking by just interrupted and went, no, he won't. So there is still some recognition of formality. So we do not play it too loose. It's quality over quantity. If nothing further on that, I think we've kind of made the point on that one. Okay, prohibition, 3.6. I think this is where we've gotten into discussing the fact of council members serving in another capacity over 1 year. And I think what we're gonna have to do, I'm gonna move, unless you guys wanna talk more on this, I'd like to move past this one quickly too, because I think ultimately we want uniform language, be it mayor, council, staff members, regarding the 1 year ban. And so we'll make sure that language gets tightened up. Vacancies, 3.7. Any thoughts?
I've had some of them. We recently had a council member run for re-election, won, and 2 months later, he resigns. And so the people were basically, oops, is that on?
It's on now. Yeah. See the green light right there?
Oh, I'll have to see that up there, thank you. So, to me, the council should not have approved somebody to replace them. I think that the voters should have had a chance to vote again on it, see who they wanted. Because that was too long a period of time. If it had been just 2 or 3 months like January, they resigned and it's going to be up for election in April, that's something else. But this individual resigned, and after, 2 months in office? And that wasn't really fair to the constituents who needed to vote, at least my thoughts on that. But now how to handle it, in some cases, if I've read where if it's more than, 6 months, they have a new election. If it's not, the mayor makes the appointment.
I would draw your attention to section C under that, and that actually addresses, we have an existing format regarding that. One, where the council by a majority of vote, if its remaining members, which would in theory be 4 of 7, shall appoint a qualified person to fill until the next regular municipal election as established under the Missouri election calendar. Does anybody have any concerns over that? Charlene, you're saying actually.
I'm saying yes, because the people should have a right. It's not the 7 members of the council should not choose who they want to serve on the council with them. It should be the people who decide who they want to represent them. And that's my thought.
Well, and I see what you're saying, but at the same time, right here it says, so in your situation, or your example, in June the person quits. So we have 6 months left in the calendar year. This is saying at the next time of election. So we're essentially putting in a temporary council member for, in your situation, 8 months, 9 months, really, by the time that they kind of get in and get seated. So it's not like we're filling that vacancy for the remaining term, which if they got reelected, their term would be 24 months, and they then have to serve 22 months as a temporary council member. So it's the next available one. So to me, it's a short enough period. And the likelihood that happens on a regular basis, I don't know if it's necessary to go through a long, drawn-out process to establish something that maybe happens once every, hypothetically 20 years or something, when a couple months later we're going to have somebody fill that spot by the voters, especially with the costs associated with running an election, the process, the cost, the administrative time to set something up, and then what do? Do you just have it here and people from that ward can walk in and cast a vote and you get 22 people from that total ward to show up? It's kind of a waste of resources if that's the outcome.
Ms. Warner, not to put you on the spot here, but as our city election official, do you know what the city's, just ballpark, what the city's expense is on a traditional municipal election?
First, to explain a little bit of the election costs, it does depend on how many entities have ballot items on a particular election. I would guess our typical April election could be anywhere from $7,000 to $12,000 for just elected council seats. If there were to be ballot questions on it, would be considerably more.
So what would it be for just one person? We're not,
$7,000.
at the April election, we have at least 4.
7,000.
Still great.
Yeah.
Finance the election.
So is it worth $7,000 to just wait 6 more months to when we're going to have the election to replace that seat anyway?
No. Commissioner Wiggins, I will point out, just from a trivia standpoint, there's a certain irony in, there's actually a majority of the members on this current council that were appointed more than elected. Now, many of them have subsequently been re-elected, but there is the 20 years I agree with you, and I'm not challenging you on that. But I did want to point out we've had kind of an oddity the last couple of years. But
What I for clarification's sake, I meant that quickly after being elected, as opposed to you know, you're at 22 months and a job takes you away and, you know, you can't fulfill those last remaining months.
And I think
That
the point's
early in
made.
the term is probably not very likely. I can understand mid to late of a term that happens quite a bit, but
And I think you make a very good point. Under this current rule, it would be no longer than 11 and a half months at the longest. Ms. Daring, did you guys have any discussion on this the last time you guys met? Do you recall? Okay. While she's looking that up, one of the thoughts that, and Ms. Schubach, I'll kind of just throw back on the point you were making. Obviously, we want the council, since they are representative of the people, to have as much citizen input as possible. I do want to point out during the appointment process that citizens are encouraged to come up and vocalize their support or opposition to candidates. And there's actually, it is deemed like a public hearing. And we have had a few instances where a couple of residents came up, but in theory, citizens, we could have 500 people show up and say, we want to vote, we want this person. So the citizens maybe need to be aware that they can take more control over that appointment process. The other thing is, but let me ask you this, and I'm just going to throw this out to play devil's advocate here. What if we remove the phrase on the second line, the last word on the second line, municipal? So to fill the vacancy until the next regular election. The reason being is municipal elections, the regular municipal elections by state law are done in April. But thank you. Every other year, like next year, we will have an election in April, and under Missouri statute, we don't have a regularly scheduled election for 12 months. This year, we had a March election, an April election, an August election, and a November election. And actually, in theory, we could have had this before the voters on the November ballot. There would have been costs, but we already were incurring some election costs, having city issues or things like that affecting the city on that ballot. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
yours keeps going off. I don't know.
If there's too many on at once.
Got it.
Yeah, we got one on right here.
I tell you what, Mr. Acklin, yours was on. What's your thoughts? Okay, well, you're welcome to chime in. But Ms. Schubach, then I'll kind of banter with you for a second. Do you think that would be some respect to the voter while still honoring the fact that it's during an election cycle?
Yes.
Mr. Wiggins?
Well, I guess I would be curious to know, obviously, if the major cost is already involved to hold the election, is there a lot of additional costs? So in this year, as an example, as you use with 4 elections, let's say in the August primary to add, in this particular instance, add somebody, is there a major line item cost associated with that? You know, is it, okay, it's $7,000 to start and it's $500 for each additional line item? Or is it kind of it just costs us like $50, and so that would be worth the expense of having the ballots done for this process?
Again, it does depend on how many entities have items on one particular election. I, in my time, have never had election costs below $7,000. So, it could be as high as, with our bond election, wasn't it 12?
I just meant if we're already, in this instance, this example, we're already having the August primary, so that the main costs are already in place, the foundation's been laid, to add one little line item. Does that increase the cost a lot? We've already spent the $7,000 or $10,000 to add, for Ms. Hubach's sake, for this. Is that a minimal expense?
Again, repeating, minimal expenses, in my experience, never been below $7,000.
Jeannie, let me kind of play with that a minute. So, for example, this last August, we had what was it, an amendment? It was the out-of-state sales tax on car sales. So if that was the only issue we had on the ballot, our cost would be approximately $7,000. But before the ballots, before that was kind of locked in place, if all of a sudden we called up the Board of Election and said, could we throw on a city council race, it doesn't go to 14. It's set. We're already paying the 7 on the ballot on the language for the proposition. Adding a separate line, does it double? Is it 7 per? Mr. Freeburn.
And it would also vary. One of the things you have to remember is if we were looking for a single council member seat and being elected, we're only opening a limited number of polling places. We're not opening up the entire city. So it would even vary. If the mayor's position, we would have to have ballots, all the polling places in the city, and all of those ballots printed, and all of those pollsters, the election officials working at the polls. If it's a single ward, we have a maximum of 2, I believe, precincts if we were simple, that they would be opening, and a limited number of ballots.
But in the hypothetical, we're only talking about council, so the mayor is not applicable.
So
But
we
if
would
we're
be
only
opening
dealing
a
with that
single,
ward,
2 precincts.
but if we're already opening those 2 precincts for a ballot issue, yeah, I mean, just adding the extra little 2 inches on the ballot sheet, it's the same. The card is still printed.
Right.
The same number of cards, so there's no increase of that. So I think what we're trying to kind of pin down here is every time you add so for example, next year we will have 4 council members, and that race could be theoretically run for about $7,000. If we decided to have a 5th council member, because actually we do this coming year, it's still $7,000. Once we kind of get the base election in place and how many cards, the polling place is at, adding one more name on there doesn't increase the number by $7,000.
Correct.
Okay, and the thought is, since my hypothetical here, until the next regular election, if like in this particular year, if it were the primary or the general election, we already have election cards already printed. We already have every polling place being used. So actually, it would be a nominal cost increase. Correct?
For
Just
for
throwing
any
on
general election.
Yes.
It would depend on whether there are other ballot issues on that election. For instance, August, hypothetically, we could end up with an incredibly cheap election, because if there was nothing else on the ballot and we were looking to elect a council member, which was the scenario I just gave, you would only have at max 800 ballots with 1 line item on them to elect that council member. So it could come down considerably even from the $7,000. But the cheapest I've ever seen it, no matter what scenario is painted itself, is about $7,000.
Okay. And then the final thing to keep in mind is our rule already says that we're going to have to bear the roughly $7,000 cost anyway in the following April. So whether we bear that the following April or bear that like in the general or the primary this year, it's the same cost.
So it's not divided up. It's not like a $7,000, it's divided up by everybody.
That's just our part.
Yes, that's our part. So our cost could go even higher depending on the type of election. Yes, sir.
I hope I'm not beating a dead horse. So, if in the primary this last year, this August election, because there was something regarding the city on the ballot, so if we add another city item, ideally it doesn't cost anything much more. However, if that was just a state and federal vote and there was no city item whatsoever, that's when we incur the $7,000, correct? So if we've already put the base of 7, so it just would have to be worded in a way that as long as other city matters. Because do we really want, because if we spend $7,000 in November and we're going to spend another $7,000 in April, we've just spent $14,000 for what we can do. Just wait for 6 more months and just only spend the $7,000 because that's an expected cost. However, if there's a city item already on the ballot, like we said, the polls are going to be manned, the papers are going to be printed, the stickers are going to be available. We're already spending the $7,000 to talk about roads or to talk about a building tax or whatever the case may be. So we could make it specific that it's not just the next, I mean, we say next regular municipal election, but the next regular election that contains something pertaining to the city. Because then we've already spent the $7,000.
Well, and the reason why I find this issue interesting is if we had a full special election for the voters, why would it be just till the next April? Why wouldn't it be to fill the remainder of the term? So that instance, we wouldn't have an election for that seat the next April. They would go to the remainder of the next term.
Right, for that position. But when you're up for re-election in April, along with, so let's say in this state, instead of 5, we actually have 4 because we're going to do 1 in November. We're still spending that $7,000. So we're now up to $14,000. So it could just be worded in a way that as long as the city's already spent the money, let's go ahead and tack it on. If the city hasn't spent the money, don't tack it on. Let's not spend $7,000. I can give you some projects that we can spend $7,000 on.
Well, and I wouldn't fight you on that. I'm throwing out the hypothetical. We don't need, because I mean, obviously, there's been some pro and con about wanting the voters to have a voice, and we've talked about the value of the cost and cost efficiency of it, because why spend bad money? Again, thoughts, Tim? You look perplexed.
I'm just a willing wheel.
Mr. Castleman.
I get the sense that we're speaking of this, and it sounds like we're considering looking at this one vacancy. What if we had a series of vacancy over a calendar year? We would have running elections.
And that's the interesting slippery slope of this thought process. Well, and that's why I think it's good that we're kind of bringing this up, is because we, the law of unintended consequences. My thought is, hey, we get right to the next vote, but you're right. We could have a March and April and August and a November and a next August, and next thing you know, everybody's going to the polls every 3-4 months.
So who's running next?
Ms. Hubach. Well, it obviously nobody's technically declared. So, but Ms. Hubach's seat is up. Let's see, and that's in Ward 4. Ward 3 is Mr. Barber. Ward 2 is Mr. Burke, and Ward 1 we have both. Because the appointment for Mr. Stevens was just to get to April. So do we like are we comfortable with the existing language? Or do we feel that it's okay to allow the council a potential window to appoint, keeping in mind that it is noticed up, open to the public, anyone in the public can apply. It is a public hearing, it's actually a public meeting for the public to even participate in.
Yeah. I don't know how comfortable I am with this. With Commissioner Hubach's concern, I do think if there is a majority of the term left remaining, in this case, you're 2 months into a 2-month or a 2-year term, so you've got 22 months post resignation in this situation. I think the logical thing would be to have a special election, but then again, you've got the dynamics of this they're just not cut and dry. I mean, it's comfortable, but it's uncomfortable at the same time. And I think we have to, at some point, remember that we're looking 10 years down the road on this stuff. As the city grows, one, the cost of the election is going to increase. But by doing what we did now, I think for me, I was okay with this process because it only goes to the next election. We don't have to pay that money. The other dynamic of this is he ran unopposed. I mean, Councilmember Stevens ran unopposed, so there was nobody at the time that challenged him. So the logical thing is, if you decide to have an election, especially for this, what if only one person, what if Mr. Councilmember Seamers was the only one that signed up for this? Now, in this case, it wasn't, but, I mean, there's that dynamic too. So, it's, I go this way 1 minute and then I go back this way the other. So I think we just have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable sometimes.
If only one person is trying to run for that
Yeah.
seat, what's the point in spending $7,000?
Absolutely. I think the validation of that is uncontested.
Well, and one of the thoughts, I was kind of playing out some of this because we see this with other entities where, and I'm not sure, Mr. Fairborn, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Some entities under state statute, if there is no contested seat, are not required to have an election.
Does not apply to municipalities, sir.
Thank you. I wanted clarification on that. The final thing on this particular section, because I think we've really talked this out very well, do we want to put any restriction or limitation on the council itself? Right now, the council has a format. And if you've ever watched the appointment process, that, they come in, we ask approximately 6 to 8 questions. Half the questions I think are ridiculously horrible and don't give us any real indication on the candidate themselves. So if it were me, if I were in charge, I would completely redo them. But I'm not in charge, so I don't get to do that. But the idea is we don't turn it into any kind of a debate. It just literally, people sit up there, we throw them questions, give them 3 minutes, they give us canned answers, and then it's a popularity contest and we vote them in. Do we as citizens want to give any instruction to them? Give any guidance? Say, here are the, we want this type of process. We want to put this limitation on the council. Any thoughts on that, or are we just comfortable letting the council kind of establish its own rules? Kind of, they have to play with this person on the team. It's kind of not to misuse, since this is, the locker room has been referenced politically lately, so I want to get away from that reference. But, when I grew up playing sports, even into college, the coach ruled the team on the field, but the team ruled themselves in the locker room. And if a player got out of line, the rest of the team took care of things in the lockers. And do we want to allow the council kind of its own self-rule at this point? Or do we want to put our own comments or restrictions?
I'm trying to think, how many does it take to, 4 is a majority?
4 out of the 7.
But if somebody abstains, then 3 will select the new council member?
It's not a majority of the 7, so it would fail.
It has to be a majority of the 7.
And you have to revote. And we have had instances
Okay.
where we've had pluralities, where a vote was a second vote, and you vote until eventually you hit a majority. There is no tiebreaker to the mayor in this instance.
Well, I was just thinking about, we also had an individual who won an election. It was contested, and there was 2 people running, and he won, and a week later he was transferred out. And at that time, it seemed ideal that the person who had run against him should have been the one that would take the seat, but the council chose somebody that their friend, not the friend of the electorate.
Ms. Hubach, I remember that. I won't comment on the friend thing. I wasn't on the council, so I don't know if that's the case. But this brings up an interesting point. The election occurred in April. There were multiple people running for the race. The person that won took the seat. The second person, I want to say, had about 250 votes of the citizens and was in second place out of 3. When the person who won stepped away, there was some discussion. Is there almost kind of a quasi obligation that the council should respect the citizens' vote that just recently occurred and put the second place person in instead of kind of, throwing the pot out and restarting the stew? What are your thoughts on that?
I would think that if the council had 4 votes, they could do that for that individual.
But do we want to put a requirement in here, or do we allow the council to still kind of come to their own conclusion that way? Mr. Ackland?
Mr. Chairman, just based on your scenario you just presented, I'm of the opinion that I would put the person who came in second, just based off of what you said and just kind of listening to things. I kind of like the idea that if someone stepped away for whatever reason, I'm of the opinion that you put this person, respect the rights of the voters, and put that other person in who came in second.
Mr. Wiggins?
What are the limitations on that time frame? 1 week, 2 weeks, sure, okay, no problem. 6 months from now, if I took second, I might have moved on with things in my life, and you come and say, hey, by the way, you're the next city council member, I might tell you to go kick a rock. There has to be some sort of reasonable time frame, because otherwise, after 6 weeks, that person might have zero interest, especially because they lost the election. They want people to come back and be like, well, never mind.
And I apologize, I'm compelled to bring this up because as a political science professor, I get inundated with people who tell me how ridiculous the Electoral College is, and then I give them a 2-hour lecture that explains that it absolutely makes perfect sense. One of the reasons for the Electoral College, by the way, which meets in December, is when the citizens do something really stupid in the second Tuesday of November, that the Electoral College has a number of weeks to fix the problem. And because now, luckily for president, we've not had this happen, but there have been other elections where after the election, a fact was discovered that would have disqualified that person. So the purpose of the Electoral College is to catch that if the whim of the people sometimes is not necessarily the best choice of a candidate, would we, getting to respect that concern, Mr. Fairborn, I'm going to kind of thrust this a little back on you for a moment. Do we have any type of procedure established under the ordinances or by resolution that spell out the procedure?
We do, sir.
So would it be would we potentially leave the language as is and maybe address this at that level? So basically I'm inferring, can this commission encourage the ordinance committee to consider this at their level?
You absolutely can, sir. We will defer to the more general language of the charter at all times. And that's one of the values of having the tandem groups meeting now, and I can assure you that the management team that's meeting on the Code of Ordinances is very well aware of everything that this Charter Commission is doing. And many of them want to get out of that on a weekly basis.
Okay.
But we would defer to general language of the charter, which of course is what we always encourage, is that the charter language be general and that the code language tack it down.
And boy, Mr. Zer picked the best time to walk in on this conversation, so Mr. Fearborn can get off the spotlight on that issue. And Mr. Ackland, help me out here. Would you kind of see it as at least give right of first refusal?
Yes. Yes.
And so maybe language that would, I'm kind of stalling here to give Mr. Zer a moment to catch up here.
Where they've chosen the second person.
And I think we all want to give recognition to the voters. If the voters went and these people got votes, should they not be given at least some sense of consideration?
And I think that's happened, I really do. That we had a chance and there was, the first person decided not to do it. Wasn't it in Ward 4, Charlene? Was that in Ward 4 where, it was back in the days of Frank, and Frank had somebody that he wanted in there in Ward 4, and the guy got in and he said, I don't want to do this, and he stepped out. Do you remember that? Jeannie, do you remember that?
Not really.
Oh, what's the matter with you? Come on here. And the guy came in and did it.
Put a date with it, I
Tree
did.
are kind of forking on us.
Yes, yes.
And the guy stepped down, and so
Right.
the second person took the job. And Frank was very upset.
Yeah, to try to keep language as simple as possible here, but I'm not sure if we can. I could even see a dependent clause leading out the sentence by saying, after giving the second place in the last election right of first refusal, the council by a majority of the vote may appoint. With that being said, though, there are some slight variations there. One, what if it is an instance where we are in that election cycle where it's an April to April before elections, and this is almost a year later, where really kind of the vote of the people's grown mildly stale? And in addition, what if second place only got like 5 or 10% of the vote? Yes, it is the will of the people to give, that they were second, but maybe they were kind of like a write-in vote level, I'm sorry, I'm making myself even more confused, because what if the second place was actually somebody who wrote somebody in, and those 2 or 3 votes, because somebody's family decided to vote for one of their family members, my wife actually said she wrote me in for president, and I told her that I was 56 million votes short, but
Well, and you also encounter the issue of, I believe it was it for governor, Missouri governor, Chief Wannadoobie, who was on the ballot
he
in the
was a
primary,
legitimate registered candidate,
and
by the way.
he received votes. So in this instance, if it was just him and Eric Greitens, well, he wouldn't run for Greitens. So Chris Koster and Chief Wannadoobie were the only two, and Wannadoobie got 2 votes for, the Democratic candidate spot, and then Koster drops out, and those were the only 2 running, and he gets 2 votes. I don't think the city's going to want to put in Chief Wannadoobie to fill, because it's the will of the people.
Ms. Hubach, did you have a point?
Thank you. I was just thinking that we ought to put maybe a limitation within 3 months or 5 months or something like that, that if this happens within that length of time, the will of the people, but if it's been 8 or 9 months, it's no longer the will of the people. So maybe we need to put a time limitation on.
Is there a minimum vote percentage also?
Yeah, I think, and since I was the one that originated this concept, I guess I have to take full responsibility that I'm seeing this growing 3-dimensionally, where we're starting to get to a point to create the qualifications alone for the hypothetical is starting to overshoot the base language of the charter language itself. I would almost believe at this point maybe I would rescind my hypothetical unless you guys feel that it's worthy of additional discussion. Because at this point, well, I mean, I think there's been wonderful discussion over it. It's good thought process, but I'm just not sure how comfortable and quick and concise we can be to get to that answer. And
You don't know where else to go with it.
well, no, I could talk for 2 more hours on it, and try to be serious about it. I just think we could almost write a book though on each section here, and that defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do. So, for the sake of that, I will, unless anyone wishes to pick this independently up, I would be willing to rescind that.
For
Yes, sir.
clarification, is that just the second place aspect or the entire section about
No, just the second
municipal
place
and-
part. Like I said, we've talked about this. I think for the sake of clarification, let me ask you guys, based on our conversation, are we comfortable with the existing language? Show of hands. Okay, I think that leans us in that direction.
I think you were entertaining it.
Well, and
Fair enough. Fair
and
enough. I take that.
And I think that might also be a good exercise because we do have a whole lot left to go of, we can get round and round and spend 40 minutes on a section to end up
Correct.
doing nothing, which it's good to have the discussion, but at the same time,
Correct.
we can probably gain some of that traction fairly quickly too sometimes. So
What about, to make sure we completely cover this section, what about forfeiture of office? Does anybody have any concern about forfeiture of office? Yes, Ms. Hubach.
Yes, I had a question. We had talked about if they'd missed 3 meetings in a row or something, that would disqualify them. But I see where the Ethics Commission and the state statutes say you can't do that. You have to impeach them. You can't ask them to leave. So we need to make some changes perhaps in that, either delete it or what, because it's, what is it, we say, failure to attend 3 consecutive regular meetings of the council, or whatever it is, without being excused. And yet we can't do that, because the only way we can do it is by impeachment. And then that's a completely different state statute.
Mr. Zur, I'm not sure Section 3.7B actually expressly authorizes impeachment.
It makes reference in that section solely to forfeiture, or to forfeiting his or her office if the council member doesn't comply with those requirements. I don't see any specific reference with regard to impeachment or removal by any other option.
Staff would ask the commission's leave to investigate statute relative to this. This impeachment may be a formalized process that is used for non-charter cities. Charter cities, this may be one of those issues charter cities get to make their own rules. And impeachment sounds like a formalized process that's laid into place for class cities so that they have a process in place that they can use, that they can fall back on in statute. You know the drill on
My
that.
understanding of reading the definition of a charter city, though, is the charter has the ability to make its own rules. The city can also have its own impeachment language, like the pre-existing state statute language for non-charter.
Exactly. But you also have the option of not having the language in there and simply
Correct.
going by those.
Correct. This one, I'm going to actually hold a little firm tonight, along with the judge of qualifications section. Jeannie will be off the hook she'll be another meeting. But I want to throw at you guys the idea of this. Very few items I have an agenda on coming into this, but this is actually one of them. I do not believe we have a sufficient code of ethics for this council. I think we need one. And I believe that we need some teeth to be able to censure, impeach, or to, in essence, punish a council member for wrongdoing. Prime example is we at times have executive sessions. We come in here, there are confidential discussions, there are minutes taken. Those minutes can be made public or sunshined with some limitation, but the discussions themselves are kept quiet. Typically, it's for things like litigation, real estate purchases. It makes sense why we don't want that out, personnel, things like that. We had an instance where we had a discussion regarding litigation. 2 weeks after a discussion on litigation, there is a public hearing and council members were on the dais, and a council member openly discussed and remarked about the litigation discussion that was made in executive session, and the mere disclosure of that theoretically could have told people in the audience, could have created a greater opportunity for additional litigation against the city. Now, if a council member is creating litigation or liability on behalf of the city, I mean, you know, I'm not politically picking a side here, but I know we've heard an awful lot about if you break the law regarding emails, you could be fired or jailed or whatever. If a council member commits a wrong on this dais, looking under forfeiture of office, there's no language that says, with the exception of convicted of a felony or failure to pay taxes, there's no ability to punish. What if they make an inappropriate remark? What if they disclose confidential information? Things like that. We have no teeth to be able to punish a maverick or out of line council member or mayor. Yes, Mr. Fearborn.
I might suggest to the commission that in addition to looking at 3.7B under forfeiture of office, you also look at 3.8, the section immediately following. It does outline a very vague procedure, sir.
And that's why I mentioned I wanted to get through 3.8 in conjunction with this, because obviously 3.7 actually references, I believe,
The grounds to forfeit the office.
yes, under B1, as far as qualifications. Mr. Fearborn or Mr. Zur, what language under 3.8 though defines the council member themselves? There is a process, but to judge them, but as far as what constitutes a violation and how to punish them.
The two sections are separated, and I would wonder if there doesn't need to be a if-then more within the charter language on this particular section. We've had this discussion because forfeiture of office, again, as you indicated, it starts with any of the qualifications. Well, then it says the council is the judge of the qualifications, but it's in a different section of the charter. Should certain sections of 3.7 be yanked out and a preamble to 3.8, if you will?
So, section 106.220 of the revised statutes of Missouri provides for removal and impeachment of public officers. Interestingly enough, it specifically identifies it as forfeiture of office and the reasons for the same. It provides any person elected or appointed to any county, city, town, or township office in this state, except such officers as may be subject to removal by impeachment, who shall fail personally to devote his time to the performance of the duties of such office, or who shall be guilty of any willful or fraudulent violation or neglect of any official duty, or who shall knowingly or willfully fail or refuse to do or perform any official act or duty which by law is his duty to do or perform with respect to the execution and enforcement of the criminal laws of the state, shall thereby forfeit his office and may be removed therefrom in the manner provided by sections 106.230 and 106.290. In essence, you could probably come back in and say, council member can be forfeited. You could leave the forfeiture of office, make reference to your statutory provision, and then the process for removal then comes after that under 106.230 to 106.290.
Mr. Zer, would it be easier just to have that included as B6 and reference that section?
Potentially, yes. You could say, you could say the filling of vacancies, or you could make it a new D, an individual who has forfeited their office and may be subject to removal pursuant to state statute 106.230, 106.290 as revised.
But I'm also referring not just the process, but you
Oh, the
stated
reasons.
specific
The
conduct.
boom, boom, boom reasons why.
Yes.
You could probably make that a D, or a sub 6, and then you could add a sub D to the full paragraph to make reference for, okay, if they are.
How to
forfeited-
respond to
If
it.
they have forfeited it, then your process for impeachment or removal is under 106.230.
Jeannie,
Are
Can
you
you-
talking about complete removal? You're not talking about just censure or anything like that? You want them removed?
That's what,
Censure is a type of administrative process, and I think censure should be allowed as well. Sometimes the conduct rises to the level of you need to give a written admonition or something that says, look, you didn't do anything to get kicked off, but you need to curb your conduct. And I'm one to believe that, hey, everybody deserves at least a second chance if the act was not intentional. People make mistakes. So I'd like both. But again, I'm going back to the general concept to you guys. I'm positing that the council should at some times regulate themselves. But I also believe, with the exception of somebody trying to bring a state statute application, it's difficult for the citizens to remove their own council member, to deem them as forfeiting the position or being in violation. Mr. Zer?
oh, well, I've asked Jeannie to print off 106220, and 106220 references that the 106230, which is not unusual of state statute, which would give the citizens the ability. It's pretty broad ranging. It's when any person has knowledge that any official mentioned in section 106220 has failed personally to devote his time to the performance of the duties of such office, and then it goes into or been guilty of, or et cetera, he may make his affidavit before any person authorized to administer oaths, setting forth the facts constituting such offense, et cetera, and then it goes immediately to the prosecutor of the prosecuting entity, which would be our local prosecutor, Bill Marshall, and Bill Marshall is then charged to file a complaint in the circuit court as soon as practicable upon such affidavit, setting forth in plain and concise language the charge against such official.
Okay. Well, and I do want to be careful on that. Not that I would be the one violating it and be the, but a little trivia, by the way, you know the stocks during Boston, you know who the first person was put in the stocks? The guy that invented them. He overcharged the city that put him in his own device. So I don't want to do that. But it's, so okay. Man, you guys are a hard room to make laugh. But I do have to say, though, I believe that under 3.8, the charging entity is actually the council under our existing charter.
That's correct, sir.
And I would rather keep this as the council self-regulate at that point before we get to actually going to the circuit court and trying to bring something that. Yes.
Would the commission like to see kind of a molding of the two? Still giving the council the ultimate, but some sort of wording in here, the council receiving an affidavit from a citizen so that at least that's out there, that citizens can come in and file some sort of a formalized complaint against a council member.
Yes.
That's
That's
what I
my
was
thought.
thinking. I think we want to be real careful before we give any elected body the right to remove someone that people have elected to put in there.
And I would agree, due process should definitely apply, and a fair process. But there just gets to be a point, we've had a number of instances, I've been on the council now going on 5 years, and I've had council members where I have questioned their competency, both for health reasons as well as medication, and that I believe they were not capable. That's the best way to put it. I've called into question people's motives. We had an incident a few years ago where a council member had a conflict of interest that they failed to disclose. Clearly a violation of the under rules under the Missouri Ethics Commission. A resident who was applicable to that conflict was actually on the agenda to speak that night, point that out, and a charge was being prepared to file against that council member. And at about 4:30, the National Weather Service reported that there was snow down in Lewisburg, Kansas, and Miami County. And that council member that knew he was going to have this trouble called every council member explaining how it was going to be unsafe that night to get up and back from the meeting because of the blizzard that was coming, and begged that we cancel the meeting because of that, so this council member could avoid a potential embarrassment or actual charge. Ultimately, we met because we didn't even have but a few clouds blow through and zero accumulation, but this person did not show up to the meeting in the intent to avoid the public disclosure. So if we've got people violating conflict rules, if we have people who are not competent to be on the dais, I mean, I could think of a whole.
Isn't that background check done on people before they get on the council?
No. No.
So what's wrong with this picture?
And that is a great question, because that's 3.8. The judge of qualifications right now, based on the first sentence, says the council shall be the judge. So every December, when we have filing, and I believe this year is what, the 14th, 15th, 13th, I was close, almost there, but on December 13th, we're going to have people up here at 8 o'clock in the morning bothering Jeannie, and we never have lines. And by the way, we should up the fee. Anyway,
15 bucks?
it's like $50, 20. But people are going to come and file, and we have all these things that they attest to, but nobody ever checks them. And I'm not saying that as anybody doing anything wrong, but any citizen can actually file a request, but nobody typically does. Now, I don't want to get into a police state where every time somebody files, we have people lining up and loading up.
Downstairs and have it projected.
The other thing I will point out is Missouri statute's a little vague, because actually, if you are in violation, like for example, you haven't paid your taxes, you're actually given a 30-day cure period to cure the taxes, and you're only in violation if you were aware of the tax arrearage. So if you were not, you can't be. I mean, they've left that pretty nebulous there to allow people to kind of dodge and weave. The other one is, and I expressed this to the county officials this year, the way the statute reads, you cannot be a principal of any entity that owes back taxes. Our county commissioners who just ran for re-election are the principals of the county. They owe back taxes regarding money owed to the city of Lee Summit. So technically, Jimmy Odom and Luke Scavuzzo should not have been qualified to run for office.
Mr. Luzo was over here on let's call it, is it Lucy Webb?
Scavuzzo's down in Harrisville.
Yeah, he's got to be south.
Yeah, he's south. Danielle lives over by there, his sister. But so anyway, Mr. Wiggins. Oh yes, thank you. Absolutely. So from that discussion point, there's some ambiguity as to that language. But that's a very good point. Who's watching the watchman? And even if they do complain, do we have the rules that would do anything about it if we wanted to.
Running against Coster, he still hadn't presented his taxes, or paid his taxes. Right before we voted, he still hadn't presented his taxes.
Which is not, it's not required, it's just a request. Donald Trump didn't
Yeah.
his taxes, it was not a requirement.
Right. Stop. Okay. Yes, Mr. Ackland.
Can we back up for a minute? To 3.7A, I do have a question. If you want to save it for new business, that's fine too. But I just need some verification where it says the office of the council member shall become vacant upon the council member's death, resignation, recall, or removal from office. And this is by clarification. What is in any manner? What is that saying? In any manner authorized by the charter or by law. Help me.
That's kind of typical language that's used to say we're going to have a lot of different reasons scattered throughout the charter, and therefore, if you're able to find one that applies that would have a punishment leading to removal, we're kind of saying that this is kitchen sink language. It all kind of dumps into the kitchen sink. So they don't want to laundry list every reason or possibility.
Well, then they
Yeah.
say or by law, which like if you murdered your wife or.
Well, yes, removal from office in any manner authorized by this charter or by law or upon forfeiture of the office. So, but I think as far as you're concerned about the in any manner, that's kind of just a catchphrase we use to say, we could come up with a myriad of reasons, and therefore we're not going to list them all. It's just, yeah, it's more of that. Well, or if we pass a law that says it's Tuesday, I mean, but it's to catch any possibilities without having to fully define. Maybe not the best, but
I think that there are going to be, that I recall, there'll probably be at least 4 different sections where somebody could be, a procedure for recall is outlined. Section 3.8 on the next page is a different section. So it's meant to put the umbrella over all of those and cover any section of the charter.
for the sake of these 2 sections, we were wanting to see the language out of the state statute. So my recommendation is, I think this is something we want to kind of make sure we lock into place how we feel. So we will get this between our next 2 meetings. We'll get statutory language on this that we can apply. And with that being said, because I think much of that is also going to offer some of the judge of qualifications criteria, I'm not sure we have any further to discuss on 3.7 or 3.8 unless any of you feel otherwise.
And it is 7:15, sir, just a reminder. Could staff make just 2 very quick reports?
Please.
In running in and out of the room today, and I apologize for the discombobulation with everything that's going on right now, but we have managed to find the recommended compensation language, and we gave to you all, I don't know if, Jeannie, did you give a report on this?
Yes, not a report. She provided
Well,
that.
we thought, we do have some reports relative to the county and some conflict of interest information concerning dually holding paid elected offices that is part of the unfinished business for tonight that we'll carry over to the next one. But just as a general, I thought you all might enjoy this from the Missouri Ethics Commission. Doesn't specifically target dual in the case that we are looking for, but it's got some really good information that might give you some good background and generate some thoughts on the part of the commission for later. That concludes staff reports for tonight, sir.
Perfect, thank you. For the sake of completeness, we'll move on from new business to public comment. Any member of the public wish to come forward and speak? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All in favor? We're adjourned.